I think the main area where things can become a little bit sensitive at times is in relation to the second box that I mentioned, which really relates to extenuating circumstances. Now, sometimes those can be, I guess, sort of logistical or practical to some extent, and so writing details about them just isn't problematical. But of course, it could also refer to really quite distressing personal circumstances. And I think it's a good thing that there's now this opportunity to mention extenuating circumstances in the school reference, because it means that all the universities involved in assessing the application are aware of them. But I do think it's important that the person writing the reference and the person applying maybe liaise a little bit before to make sure that the applicant is happy for details of certain kinds to be mentioned in this section devoted to extenuating circumstances.
Hello everyone, welcome to Cambridge from the Inside. We're here with a returning guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Marcus Tomalin. I'm the Director of Admissions here at Trinity Hall, and I'm back again.
Nice. And today we're going to be talking about the school reference, which is a part of the UCAS application process. It's something that's done by teachers rather than the students applying for universities. So Marcus, what is the school reference for anyone who doesn't know?
Well, as you say, it's a part of the UCAS application, and it's a part of it that the applicant doesn't complete, which makes it a bit distinctive. It's really there so that the universities assessing the applications can get more information, really, partly about the school that the person's been attending, but also things that we can talk about in a bit more detail, perhaps things like any extenuating circumstances that have disrupted the individual while they've been studying, and then also some further information about how they compare to the cohort at their school. And those are the sorts of things that it's really useful for us to see something about in the school reference.
Nice. So, and just to make it clear, like, when does the school reference need to be submitted by to UCAS?
So it's part of the UCAS application. So the deadline for that for Oxford and Cambridge is October the 15th.
Yeah.
However, many schools have their own internal deadlines for making sure that kind of high-level deadline is met. So, if someone is applying, they shouldn't be planning to complete their part of the UCAS application the day before the UCAS deadline and then just expect their school to be able to generate the school reference magically in about 10 seconds or something. So yeah, it's important for everyone who's applying to liaise with the relevant people in their school to find out what the internal deadline is. But yeah, the sort of high level answer is that it's part of the application, so it has to be complete by October the 15th.
Nice. And is there a character limit for the school reference?
There is, yeah. The character limit is 4,000 characters, which is the same character limit as the personal statement. Quite how those characters are used is up to the school, but that gives some sense of the amount of text we're expecting.
Nice. And I believe that there were some changes made to the school reference in 2024. Can you explain a bit about what those changes were and what the school reference looks like now?
Yeah, so many teachers who have been involved for more than just 1 year will be familiar with the new structure of the school reference. But basically, before the structure changed, it was just really an open text box. And the universities found that there was quite a lot of diversity in the form and structure and content of the school reference, which was kind of okay, but it made it a little bit harder to compare and contrast them. and UCAS, listened and responded to these concerns from the universities and introduced a relatively kind of gentle structure to the school reference. So, as you say, this change was made last year, and we're recording this in 2025. So it was for last year's admission cycle that the changes were made. But the school reference now consists of 3 subsections. The first one gives the school or the teacher at the school an opportunity to provide some additional information about the school. It may have to do with the kind of socioeconomic circumstances, broadly speaking, of the school's sort of demographic. Then there's a second section that really focuses on extenuating circumstances. So if the person applying has had to deal with particularly difficult circumstances, there's an opportunity to tell all the universities they're applying to something about that. And then the third section gives the teacher an opportunity to say something about the individual's academic performance. So if there's any sort of supporting information that gives us an insight into how they compare to their peers, that's often things like are they absolutely top of their class? Are they the best person in their class? Or are they in the top 5% or something like that? And that can be based on internal school tests, if the applicant's at a school where those sorts of things take place. But really anything just to give us some idea of how that student compares to other students that the school has had, in the recent past and indeed in the present.
Nice. And I think that leads on to my next question on what kinds of things should and shouldn't be put in the school reference. So,
well, anything that gives an insight into the applicant's academic ability, it's really good to include that. So those things should definitely be in there. I think the main area where things can become a little bit sensitive at times is in relation to the second box that I mentioned, which really relates to extenuating circumstances. Now, sometimes those can be, I guess, sort of logistical or practical to some extent, and so writing details about them just isn't problematical. But of course, it could also refer to really quite distressing personal circumstances. And I think it's a good thing that there's now this opportunity to mention extenuating circumstances in the school reference, because it means that all the universities involved in assessing the application are aware of them. But I do think it's important that the person writing the reference and the person applying maybe liaise a little bit before to make sure that the applicant is happy for details of certain kinds to be mentioned in this section devoted to extenuating circumstances. I mean, why I'm sort of mentioning that, well, it might be worth just clarifying that, say, here at Cambridge alone, the people who read the school reference are potentially admissions staff, like the admissions officers who process the applications, people like me, directors of admissions or admissions tutors will read it. All the interviewers will read it. And then if the individual ends up being placed in the winter pool, which is our redistribution mechanism, and we recorded a podcast about that. So if people aren't sure what that is, I'd suggest just looking at the previous podcast. Then potentially hundreds of people could read that school reference, and it won't be password protected. So, a director of studies in a particular subject at any college could just read all the details in that school reference. So it's just important, I think, that the applicants know that the school reference has an audience of potentially thousands, especially if you add in all the other universities they might be applying to. And if there's anything that they want us to know about, but they don't want it to be so easily read by so many people, then it's better if that information is communicated to us perhaps in an email.
Yeah.
At Cambridge for many years, before this change to the school reference, we had a separate extenuating circumstances form. We still have that. So if people do want to fill in an extenuating circumstances form that's not part of the UCAS application, that'll just come to us here at Cambridge, they can do that. And with any information we receive via that route, we tend to password protect that, so that only a much smaller group of key admissions personnel are able to access the content. So I don't want to sort of labour that point, but I just think the people filling in the school reference and the people applying just need to make sure that they're aware of that, and that anything that's mentioned in the UCAS school reference is information that everyone involved is sort of happy to be shared amongst quite a large group of people, all of whom are professionally involved in admission. So we don't just sort of allow absolutely anyone to access it, but it is quite a large cast of people who can access that, especially during the winter pool.
Nice. Yeah, that's really, really useful for teachers to know. And more on what should be in the school reference. You were mentioning before about things that are show academic potential, are academically related, and would that include things that show, I don't know, like personal growth or character development?
Yeah, things like that can be useful as well. I mean, sometimes we're asked whether the school reference should focus on the individual's sort of personality. Should it tell us whether they're, an inspirational leader or something like that? Something like that can sometimes be helpful, but as we've said on many of the podcasts, our primary focus is on the academic ability and potential of the applicants. And so, if someone's really confident and likes organizing things, that's absolutely fine. But equally, if someone is really shy and really nervous and quite introverted, that's absolutely fine. It's possible to be brilliant academically and to be quite noisy and gregarious. And it's possible to be brilliant academically and be very shy and very quiet. So, personality type things are less important to us by far than anything relating to academic ability and potential. So we're certainly going to prioritize the latter over the former.
Yeah. So would it be recommended for anyone when you're writing a reference, if you wanted to write something about the student's personality, to see how it's linked to their academic potential?
Absolutely. So if in the school reference, we're told things like, this individual is always curious to find out more and is very resourceful, it's good at sort of tracking down sources and making use of the available, resources. Stuff like that is helpful because that enables us to see how they function when they're researching a particular topic or something. And those things to some extent connect to personality type. If someone by nature is very curious to find out more about stuff, then it can connect. But as I say, it's more useful for us if it does connect to those things rather than it's just some sort of description of their personality in the abstract.
Yeah. So would I be right in thinking that a lot of the advice that we give students for how to write their personal statement could be applied to teachers for writing the school reference?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we often say things like, demonstrate, don't just tell us. So don't just assert that something's the case. Give us some evidence, and it's any sort of claims about the applicant that, the teacher writing the school reference makes, if they say, they're brilliant academically, that's interesting as a statement, but it's useful then if it's backed up. What's the, what are the reasons why you've reached the conclusion that this person is brilliant academically? What is it that they've done that's really convinced you of that? So again, we appreciate there's a character limit, so it can't be 80,000 words explaining why. But just something to indicate what the basis is for having formed that assessment.
Yeah, exactly. So alongside the school reference, what other pieces of information do we receive about each applicant?
So, I mean, the other things in the UCAS application, most
Yeah.
of which the applicant sends us,
Yeah.
we receive that, and then, as we've discussed on a previous podcast, the applicants also fill in this additional form,
Yeah.
my Cambridge application, where again they're able to tell us some additional things. So those are the sort of main sources of information we have about the applicants and their circumstances and stuff like that. We see other things as well, the admissions assessments and any submitted written work, but obviously that's much more exclusively focused on their academic ability.
Yeah. So in the school reference, teachers have an ability to share with us anything that they think we should know about the student, and at the very least, in the My Cambridge application, the student has a box to be able to share anything that they think that we need to know that might not neatly fit into any of the other.
That's right.
Any of the other questions.
And it might be worth saying that when people write the school reference, they do sometimes, when they're talking about, the individual. So again, this is connecting back to the personality type and stuff like that. They sometimes say, so and so is quite shy, quite nervous, may not come across well in interviews initially. Occasionally, people do that. I guess sometimes it's helpful for us because it means that we might know a little bit what to expect in advance of that interview with that person. But I should say, I've been involved with Cambridge interviews since the late 90s. And when I've seen things like that written in the school reference, I would say sort of maybe 8 times out of 10, the description the school gives doesn't match up to the person I see in front of me. Sometimes they're very shy, very nervous, and yet in the interview, the person comes across as perfectly sufficiently confident and happy to answer the question. So, if schools feel really strongly that that's worth saying, they're free to say it.
Yeah.
But, these days the interviewers are all trained and they'll adapt the way in which they ask their questions to the individual in front of them. They might end up asking the same questions, but they might just present them in a slightly different way. If someone seems shy or nervous at first, they'll ease them in a little bit more gently. Whereas if someone seems very, very confident, maybe too confident, then they may be able to go straight to the sort of topics they want to discuss. So sometimes the school reference can help with that.
Yeah, I mean, it won't be the case for all people who are quiet, but it's a common phenomenon for someone who's quite quiet, but when they're in a situation where they know that they need to communicate, suddenly there's a lot to be said. They have a lot to say.
Exactly.
Which would make sense in a classroom when you might not feel the need to speak,
right?
And but you're doing your work, but you're not going to do that in an interview because that would be silly.
Exactly.
But obviously, some people are nervous, and that should be communicated from the teacher if they feel like we need to know. And lastly, is anything in the school reference? Do we ask a student in the interview anything that's written about on the school reference?
No. So in the interviews, people might be asked about things that are in their personal statement or things that they mentioned in the My Cambridge application form, because that, as we've mentioned before, has an optional second personal statement. So all of those things may be discussed, but we never ask questions based on things that are in the school reference, partly because the applicants don't usually know exactly what the school wrote in the reference. Some schools share that with the applicants, but in my experience, at least, the majority don't. So it would potentially disconcert them. And also, as we've said, there might be some information that's in there that the applicant's not comfortable discussing. They might have been content for difficult or distressing, extenuating circumstances to be mentioned in the school reference, but they might not want to discuss them in an interview. So we're sensitive around that. And so we don't usually, I don't remember ever asking an applicant questions based on something in the school reference. It's a source of information that gives us context, but it isn't the starting point for a detailed discussion in one of the interviews.
So that piece of advice we give to students about their personal statement, in that they should know about their personal statement, and if they were to say something that I don't know, maybe they've read like a difficult text or something like that, we might ask them about that. But if something like that is written in their reference, we're not going to ask them
Absolutely.
about it.
They'd be at a disadvantage, and it would in some cases be entirely inappropriate. So.
Yeah, because I mean, I never read my school reference, and if I'm right to understand, students don't see their school references.
Not usually. I mean, if the school chooses to show them, they're free to do that. But I think in most cases that doesn't happen.
Yeah. So it'd be quite a shock if you say, "Oh, your teacher said you did this. Can you tell us more about it?"
Do I do that?
So the students can be rest assured. I think that's everything. Unless there was anything else you think we missed out on the school reference, or
Don't think so.
no? Yeah, there's a lot. Well, if you're watching this and you have any questions, do let us know in the comments. We check them regularly, whether that's on the school reference or anything else about the UCAS application process, or if there's any other podcasts you think we should do let us know. We've made playlists for our podcast now, which you can find on YouTube. There's one on admissions advice, another playlist of all the interviews advice videos that we've done, another one on life at Cambridge, and subject specific podcasts as well. So do check those out. We're going to be doing more podcasts about the application process, so do have a look out, and we'll see you guys next time. Oh, nice.
It's fine. I think that's all it needs.
Yeah.
It just doesn't need more than that.
Yeah, I think it's good. Yeah, I mean, it's such a